Today, we'll be demonstrating the product setup for the Powermatic PM1000 Tablesaw. Be sure to reference your instruction manual for important safety instructions, unpacking tips, and cleanup prior to assembly. Once you have the tools required, you're ready to get started. Remove the screws holding the saw to the pallet by unscrewing them from underneath the pallet. With the aid of a second person, carefully slide the saw from the pallet onto the floor. The table saw should be placed in an area with a sturdy, level floor, good ventilation, and sufficient lighting. Be sure to leave enough space around the machine for mounting extension wings and rail assemblies, loading and offloading stock, and general maintenance work. Exposed metal surfaces such as the tabletop and extension wings have been given a protective coating at the factory. This should be removed with a soft cloth moistened with kerosene or a cleaner degreaser. Install the storage hooks with the 2 button head screws and washers. The hooks are used to store the AccuFence when it's not in use. Tilt the arbor using the right hand wheel and remove the styrofoam packing from around the motor. Install the table extensions by attaching an extension wing to the saw table. The extension wings are identical. Use 3 screws, lock washers, and flat washers, and lightly snug the screws with a 17mm wrench. If you're doing this without an assistant, lift the extension wing vertically at an angle to the table edge. Install the center screw and washer and make snug. Pivot the wing parallel to the saw table to insert the 2 remaining screws, and repeat for the opposite extension wing. Lightly snug the screws. The front edge of the extension wings must be flush with the front edge of the saw table. If needed, tap the front edge of the wings with a rubber mallet to make them flush. Level the extension wings to the saw table using a metal straight edge or carefully jointed board. With the extension wings properly aligned, the rails and AccuFence assembly can now be mounted to the saw. Be sure to consult the manual that accompanies the fence. To install the rails, first identify the front rail, which is 2 inches by 2 inches with holes running along each side. Align the countersunk holes on the front rail to the 4 holes in the front edge of the saw table. The slotted holes will face down. Lightly secure the front rail to the saw table and the extension wings with 4 flathead screws, flat washers, lock washers, and hex nuts. Tighten just enough to hold the rail next to the table, but keep loose enough to allow for height adjustment. The front rail must be parallel to the tabletop in order for the AccuFence system to function properly. Place an adjustable square on the table and check the height of the front rail at several locations along the surface of the saw table. The measurements should be the same along the length of the rail. When the front rail has been correctly positioned, tighten all hex nuts securely with a 10mm wrench. The back rail is 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch with holes and slots running along one side only. The height of the back rail when attached to the saw is not critical. Align the holes in the back rail to the holes in the tabletop and secure the back rail to the holes in the saw table with 2 hex cap screws, 4 flat washers, 2 lock washers, and 2 screws. Next, mount the switch bracket with 3 flathead screws. The wood extension table sits flush against the saw table and along the inside of the rails. The Powermatic logo should face outward. The extension table is not bolted to the saw table. It is bolted only to the rails. The extension table and saw table must be aligned properly so the AccuFence will slide smoothly from one to the other. Clamp the table to the back and front rail. Use a level to ensure the wood extension table is flush with the saw table. Next, mount the guide tube to the front rail. The guide tube is placed on top of the front rail and is mounted with the scale facing toward the operator. Align the holes in the bottom of the guide tube with the holes in the front rail. Fasten the guide tube to the rail from beneath with hex cap screws, lock washers, and flat washers. Finger tighten only. Measure from the guide tube to the table edge in several places to ensure it's parallel to the tabletop. Adjust as needed, and then tighten all screws with a 10mm wrench. Press the tube cap into the opening of the guide tube. Use a rubber mallet to drive it on if needed. Screw the lock lever knob onto the threaded handle on the AccuFence. To level the fence to the saw table, place the fence on the table and lock it. View the fence from the left side of the saw. Look for the space between the table and the fence bottom to be equal along the entire length of the fence. If adjustment is necessary, unlock the fence. Raise or lower the 2 nylon adjustment screws the same number of turns until the space between the bottom of the fence and the table is the same. Be careful to raise or lower the fence on each side equally, or the fence sides may not be 90 degrees to the table after the height adjustment is performed. To adjust the fence parallel to the miter slot, place the fence next to the outside edge of the right miter slot and lock it. The fence should be even with the miter slot from front to back. If the fence is not even along the length of the miter slot, unlock the fence and lift up the front end. Adjust one of the two set screws until the fence is even with the miter slot edge along its entire length when locked. To square the table, place the fence on the saw table and lock it. Place a square on the table next to the fence. The fence sides should be 90 degrees to the table. At the motor side, slide the hinge pins through the motor cover cylinders and onto the hinge barrels on the saw. Close the motor cover until it catches on the latch post on the saw. Push the insert down into the table openings. Verify that the insert lies flush with the table surface by resting a straight edge across it at various points. If the insert is not flush along its length, turn any of 6 set screws to raise or lower that area of the insert. A blade is not provided with the PM1000. Remove the table insert, raise the blade arbor all the way up, and set the blade tilt to 0 degrees. Tighten the handwheel locking knob. Press the arbor lock pin and rotate the arbor to engage the pin into the slot in the arbor. Simultaneously, remove the arbor nut and loosen with the arbor wrench if necessary. Remove the flange and install the blade onto the arbor, making sure the teeth point downward toward the front of the saw. Install the flange and nut. Engage the arbor lock and tighten the nut with the provided arbor wrench. To install the riving knife, remove the table insert and raise the blade arbor all the way up and set the tilt to 0 degrees position. Pull the quick release lever to the open position. The clamp plate is spring-loaded and will move away from the bracket, leaving a gap. Slide the prongs of the riving knife into the slot between the bracket and clamp plate and push the riving knife down as far as it will go. Push the lever to closed position. The riving knife must be parallel to the saw blade. Install the insert plate into the table and position the anti-kickback pawl assembly. The angled side of the pawl block faces toward the front of the saw, and the lower pawl assembly onto the center notch of the riving knife, with the pawl straddling knife. Push and hold the button on the pawl block and push the pawl block down until it securely engages in the notch. Allow the pawls to drop freely to the table. To install the blade guard, push and hold the button at the back end of the guard. Push the guard down at an angle until the pin engages the rear slot in the riving knife. Then push down the front of the guard until it seats properly and is parallel to the tabletop. For the release button, the transparent guard leaves should drop freely to the table. Lift up on the guard assembly to verify proper seating. The bracket and clamp plate are adjusted at the factory, and no further adjustment of the blade guard and riving knife assembly should be necessary. However, proper alignment is very important. Before operating the table saw, read Section 9.6 of the manual to verify and follow adjustment procedure if necessary. Use of a compatible dust collection system is strongly recommended during table saw operation. Be sure to refer to the product manual for important electric connection instructions before operating. Any additional servicing to your Powermatic PM1000 table saw should be performed by an authorized service technician at a designated Powermatic service center. Don't forget that your Powermatic tool is backed by an industry-leading warranty. Contact our support team today to find a service center near you.